Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. I am Elizabeth Matthews, and I'm here with Cheryl Smith. We are both from the APD State Office. We are here today to talk to you about cost plans and SAN submissions through APD iConnect. We also understand that this topic is a big topic for everyone. So we are going to do our best to address your questions. We will probably pause about halfway through the presentation to go through questions, and then we will have time at the end to also address questions. So as we are going through, please send those questions in. Situations that might be a little unique or different may not be addressed live, but we will do our best to get a hold of you afterwards, just because we really do understand that although cost plans and SANs are something that are familiar to you, doing them in iConnect can get confusing. So we want to make sure that everyone has a chance to send us their questions so we can address them. If you are a waiver support coordinator and you're joining us today for continuing education credit, as always, that information will be provided at the end of the call. So if you are here for that, please stay on until the end and I will share that information with you. Quickly, it is a 1.5 CEU credit opportunity today, and there is an assessment that you would need to pass with a score of 75% or higher to earn that credit. So as we are going through the presentation, take notes, prepare yourself for an assessment if you are here for that credit. With that being said, I have attached the presentation material to our webinar. So you all have a copy. It is found in the handouts section of the webinar control panel. It is a PDF. Take a second, open that up, download it so you have it for reference. It will also be posted on the APD website probably Monday, along with the recording of today's presentation. So you will have materials and our presentation to refer back to whenever you are doing cost plans or SANs and you get stuck or have questions. You are welcome to use these materials as well as all of the other iConnect materials we will talk about today. So today we are here to talk about APD iConnect cost plans and SAN submissions. Again, my name is Elizabeth Matthews. I will be speaking about the cost plans, and Cheryl Smith is on the SAN submissions. So let's go ahead and get started. Today's agenda, we are splitting up the hour into two parts. So the first part will be consumer plans. We will be discussing the overview of the plan service screen, what some of those fields are on the screen, and how to use them properly. We will also be going through tips for plan management, different things that we have learned over the past months that we think would be very helpful and useful for you to ensure that your plan is submitted and reviewed timely. And then Cheryl will take over and she will speak on SAN submissions. She has a few resources that she wants to talk about, and specifically she's going to focus on common reasons that a SAN might be incomplete and how to avoid some of those reasons. So we're going to start off and we're going to go through a scenario, and it's a scenario that you all are very familiar with. And hopefully it is something that you will then be able to apply to many of your consumers. So in this case, we have an individual who has 6 hours of personal supports every day. When you are building that plan service screen for the standard 6 hours a day, there are certain areas on this screen that need to be calculated correctly. So as always, when you're working in iConnect, start at the top of the screen, work your way down. Make sure you have the correct dates, your correct region, and your correct rates. I'm not going to focus on those today because all of you are familiar with those parts of the screen. What we are going to focus on today are the units. So in this case, 6 hours a day for 365 days totals 8,760 quarter hours or units. That is what your total is, but the way you're going to fill it out on the screen is by day. So if you look at this screenshot, you have 24 units per calendar day, and then you have your total, 8,760. This is probably your most common way to fill out the screen. It's one that you guys should be familiar with. And if you do it correctly, the screen or the system will actually automatically calculate it for you because it's a standard calculation. So what happens if your individual that you have on your caseload requires additional hours? So in this case, our consumer fell and now requires 2 extra hours each day to help him at night. Well, you would need to go into the cost plan and make some adjustments. And to do that, you're going to focus on 2 areas of the screen. That's going to be your total number of units area and your annualized units area. The total number of units is going to increase to 8,984, and that is the standard 6 hours a day that he was already getting, plus 56 hours for the month of February. So in this scenario, I think I calculated it for the fall occurred at the end of January, so his increase was going to start February 1st. So in that case, you have to manually update this screen. So you're going to go in to that total number of units field and you're going to change it to the 8,984. But this is only a temporary increase, so you're not looking into the next fiscal year. So your annualized units field is going to stay at that 6 hours, which is the 8,760. So you're making 2 changes, and they are manual changes. So let's say your consumer contacts you, it's the middle of February, and he has decided he doesn't want to be living at home anymore. He feels like he might be safer if he were to move to a group home. So you help him find his new place to live, and you now have to go into the cost plan and end the personal support service. There's a few places that you will be making changes. The first one is going to be that end date on the service. And from what I can tell from the plans that I look at, you guys are doing a great job of ending those services with your end dates. So you're going to go in, you're going to say, okay, this person, he's going to be moving to his new group home April 1st, so we're going to end it for March 31st. Then you're going to drop down and you're going to go to that total number of units field. And you're going to have to do some subtraction. You're going to need to figure out what is left for the year. And in this situation, it'll be 6,626 because he will have personal supports for 9 months. Plus, you don't want to forget, you also have those additional hours for February that he was using. So once you do that calculation, you see, okay, that's 6,626. You're going to manually change that field, the total number of units field. And then this is a service that is ending. You do not need it for the next fiscal year. He will not be using personal supports. He will be in a group home. So at this point, you're just going to zero out those annualized units. This is a big step that I'm seeing people are missing. And the one way to really think about it when you're doing these ending of service screens is what you need for this year versus what you would need for next fiscal year. And if you have those two and they are different, then your total number of units and your annualized units fields are going to have different numbers. If you have no changes, if your person is content with their services and they just want to keep going through just without any changes, then those two fields, those will be the same. They will be equal. But anytime you guys are moving things around, even if you're changing providers, changing ratios, changing services altogether, you're going to see those two fields are going to be different. So make sure when you're doing your calculations, you kind of have that in your mind so that when those plans are being reviewed, it gives us a whole, like an extra layer of information. Because if I'm looking at your plan, I may not know the whole story behind the consumer, but if I see the numbers are changing, that gives me a clue, and I can go and look at your supporting documentation and I can double check and make sure that you have all of your calculations correct based on knowing there's a change. So before I move on, if anyone wants to put some questions in the box specifically to the total number of units field and the annualized units field, we can try to address those quickly.
Hey, Ed, there's a couple questions or a couple comments that indicate that the system won't let you put a 0. You have to put a 1. The only field that requires that can't be a 0 is the units per field, right, Elizabeth?
That is correct. So units per is different. So units per is what the total number of units you would need for the 1 unit of measure. So in this, with this screenshot that's up on the screen right now, the scenario is 24 units per day. So if you were to try to put a 0 in the units per, it's going to say no, because that means you aren't using anything for that day. And logically, that doesn't make sense because you know your person needs services. So units per will definitely always need a number. And depending on your unit of measure, you would do your calculation. Annualized units, you should definitely be allowed to use 0 because there are so many scenarios where you don't need units for the following fiscal year. So just if you run into that error message, double check to see what fields you're using and what fields you're editing, because all of our fields, or most of our fields, all have the word unit in them, so it can definitely get confusing. So just double check. And if you get that error message over and over and over again, reach out to someone, see if they can help you walk through the screen, because it might be something very simple and you're just overlooking it, and it could be corrected just by a quick change. It might not actually be something that requires a help desk ticket and talking with our help desk. Okay.
Question, if there's a change of provider, do they have to put 0 in the annualized units field?
If you are changing the provider mid-year and you know the following fiscal year that provider is not coming back, then I would 0 it out for annualized units. So, for example, if you're doing personal supports and your consumer fires their personal support staff, you know that person is not coming back to provide any type of service, yeah, you would 0 that out.
There's a few questions about what if they've been doing it wrong all along? Do they need to go and fix it now?
That's a
For the
great
annualized
question.
units field, yeah.
Yeah, so that's a great question. The ones that are sitting in the region or the state queues that have errors, we are trying to fix them as we come up on them. If you have ones that are in approved status, and if you're making changes and we'll get into this in a little bit, but if you make changes to a plan that won't require additional reviews, I would go back in and make those edits. If you choose to make changes to if you choose to make changes to plans that will require additional reviews, like a region or a state review, we'll talk about that in a minute, because that requires some extra steps. So, Cheryl, was that clear, or?
Yes, I mean, the annualized unit field was developed for the notices, for when the regions do notices. These fields populate onto the notice, and that's what it was designed for. It doesn't mean that that's the number you're going to be stuck with next fiscal year. So I think, you're okay with not changing it right now, because it's probably just going to put things back in the queue.
Right.
But that's what it was designed for.
Right. So when you're looking at these screens, you will notice that annualized units field, it doesn't calculate anything. So if you're changing that number, your total money, it doesn't change on the screen. So it's more for informational purposes, for tracking, just to kind of make sure that you are identifying what's needed for this year and next year. Okay, so I'm gonna move on to the next section of this screen. So underneath all of the units and all of the money are the comments section. And the comments section is so helpful. It's helpful for support coordinators, it's helpful for providers, and it's helpful for all of the APD staff. So I want to make sure that we talk about this and we focus on it, because the more information and the more detail support coordinators can provide us, the smoother the review process will go. So every time you update a plan service screen, you need to put some information in that in the authorization notes and comments section. So in this example, and this is our personal supports example, we have 3 entries and they were all added at different times. So the first one, personal supports provided 6 hours a day, 7 days a week, that one was entered when we did the first cost plan last summer. And then we had a change. That person fell, we needed to increase the units. So once you made the calculation changes, the support coordinator then went in and made a comment and explained why they were increasing that that month's worth of personal supports. And then a few weeks later, you had your conversation with your consumer and realized, okay, we need to move. So you went in, you did your other termination calculations and added the extra comment about ending the service. Having those like running commentary for the service will support your additional documentation that you are also uploading. So it's a great idea to have some simple but clear information on the plan service screen, because that is for the authorization, and you want that to mirror or support the provider documentation that you're uploading to the note. So it needs to be the same. Once the plan gets to region and state review, you guys know this, you'll see the plan service status start to change, and then you will see the region and the state reviewers' comments below. So as you're going through and you're checking on your plans, you'll be able to track where we are in the review process of your plan. So the plan service screen, the main screen with the table with the whole plan with all of the different types of services a person has a very, very helpful column. And in this situation, just take a quick notice. You will see the service array has changed. We're not really talking about personal sports anymore. We're going to be talking about ResHab just for a minute. But this table, all the way to the right-hand side, you'll see the plan service status. And this status tells you where you are with your different services. So for a service that does not require a change, this example would probably be support coordination. You see there's two service lines for support coordination, but one of them has been terminated and one of them is for the full annual 12 months. That support coordination is not changing because the change already occurred, and it's clearly telling you one is terminated and one was approved. You don't need to touch those services if you're doing anything with other services. So let me reiterate that. For services that are on a plan but are not being changed, a support coordinator does not need to open the screens and make adjustments. If it's already been approved, it can stay approved. If you're in the situation with, as you could see in the ResHab, they're changing levels and they're changing levels mid-year. If you're in that situation, you'll need to end one and start the other, just like how we talked about in the past scenario. But the one that you're ending, so in this case, it is ResHab Behavior Focus Extensive 1. You can see that service ended January 31st. It is approved. You do not need to change that service status when you are making the change. That's because in the past year, someone already looked at it. They already saw that all the documentation was in place. The person met the medical necessity for that level. They went ahead and approved it. If you were to change that status, it would trigger a second review, which is not necessary, especially since it's a service that is ending. Above it, where it says ResHab Behavior Focus Extensive 2, that's your new service. So that's the one where you are now going to be entering in the new units, providing the medical necessity documentation for that level of care, and that's the one that's going to be triggering all of the secondary reviews. So depending on if your service was previously approved or if it's a new one, that will determine who is reviewing what. And we'll talk about that in just a moment. Cheryl, is there anything you want to clarify in this section before we move on?
No, there's more questions than we're going to have time to handle, so we'll have to,
Okay.
address those, later. So.
Okay, sounds good. Okay, so the last screen that we're going to talk about today is the plan information screen. That is the main screen. When you first open that plan, it's the one that has the WSC's name on it. It has the basic cost plan dates and things like that. This is also where the region and the state review queue is determined. So down towards the bottom, if it says region or state review, and there's the drop-down menu, you can choose what region to send your plan to. Once you get to the point where you are ready to send your plan, you must, absolutely must, run your validation report. You should not be sending your plans without running validation. And that's because the validation will tell you very clearly if your plan needs to go to the region or the state office. If all of your plan services are in approved status and the validation fails, because there are some reasons why plans would still fail even if all of your services are approved, the WSC needs to send that plan to the region for review. That is so they can do that one last check, and then they can put that final plan on this page, on the plan details screen. They'll put that status into approved for you. There is a new field, or not a new field, it's just newly required, is the review request date field. So when we started this, the field was optional. Now it is a required field. So when it's time for you to send your plan to the region, you will enter the date that you're sending the plan. So, excuse me. So in this scenario, I took this screenshot on the 15th of February. So I added the date of the 15th. You don't backdate it and actually, I don't even think you're going to be allowed to backdate it, but you're not going to forward date it either. You want it to be the day that you're actually sending it. Once it gets through all of the reviews, and for the plans that come to the state office for review as well, that date will be deleted and it'll be blank. And that's so any other time in the future when if you need to make edits, you could then refresh the date and put a new date in there. So if you have plans right now that don't have dates in them, but they're approved, don't worry about it. It's there for when you need to make changes in the future. So again, I'm just going to reiterate, if you have services that are in approved plan service status and your validation still fails, you are going to send your plan to the region first. If it requires state review, then the region will send it to the state to do the final review. So plan validation, just want to touch on this just for a moment. Plan validation is a wonderful tool. It is something that WSEs need to be looking at every single time you work on a plan. And that's because there are so many things that you guys can fix or edit or change before a plan ever makes it to the region or the state. So if you get validation errors for needing to link a new service to a budget, if you need to update a living setting or correct service rates, those are all things you guys can be doing so that once it is time to do a secondary review, those things are already corrected and it won't hold stuff up. Once you get to the point where your plan validation only has reasons for region or state review, that's your time to say, okay, I'm done, I'm sending it to my region office. Because at that point, the regional staff can address any concerns that are specific to them. And then the same thing, once region staff finishes their review and there's state review still on the validation report, then it'll come to us and we'll do that final cleanup, pretty much, just making sure everything is set and ready to go. We will run the validation the last time and it will be a clear past validation. So we have some common examples of what requires state review. And these are things that you all may have already picked up on the patterns, but I just wanted to reiterate. Personal support services that total $25,000 or more, that is always going to require a state review. Residential habilitation levels that are extensive 1 or higher, and or the behavior focus or intensive behavioral residential habilitation designations. Those are always going to require the state review. So keep that in mind when you're working on plans that have those types of services, because you know from the get-go, it's always going to need that secondary review. So we have a few tips that we want to focus on today for plan review. And this slide in particular is going to be a really good one for you to keep handy, just as like a quick reference guide. The details of how to do some of this or the steps behind the scenes, you will need to go back into your iConnect resources, but this is a good like one shot, here's what I need to remember. So plans that do not require region or state review should not be sent to the region or the state review. If you have a validation report and everything is good to go, no errors detected, then you're done. Be sure to include your supporting documentation for any change to a plan. I've mentioned this a few times and I'm going to mention it again. The more information you can provide for a plan change, the quicker and more thorough of a review we can all make. So make sure that supporting documentation is uploaded to a cost plan note. It's identified clearly, make sure your document titles are clear and we know what we're looking at. Planned service screens do not need to be duplicated. Changes can be made throughout the year to the same planned service screen. So what that means is as long as the provider, the rate, and the ratio are staying the same, you can update those units throughout the year. You do not need to be making multiple lines on a plan with the same provider, same rate, same ratio. It makes things so much more confusing. Just when you're in that situation, just make sure that you are including those new comments regarding the change. That way it can be tracked. Remember to update the authorization notes and comments section anytime you change the units. I've said this over and over and over again. It's because it is vital. We need to know what you're changing. The worker on the plan should be changed to the WSC when the plan is sent to the state office. So I understand the regional process has support coordinators changing the worker name to their liaison, and definitely follow your regional process. But if your plan is to come up to the state office, we need your name back on the plan. I have seen many times my name or Cheryl's name on plans, and that is not the process. That is not going to help anyone in the long run, because once that plan gets into approved status and it has the wrong person's name on it, it's a bit of a hassle to make that change, to put your name back on. So work with your region, let them know we need to make sure that your name is back on the plan if it's coming to state office. And then lastly, update and create service authorizations correctly, or it could jeopardize the consumer's budget. So WSCs need to be updating authorizations once plan changes are approved. If you are delaying those authorization updates, there could be issues when it comes time to bill for services. So just be sure to update and create new authorizations as soon as your plan has been approved. Stay on top of those plans, check those statuses. Once you see that approved stamp, go in there, update, or create the new authorizations. Okay, take a quick moment, jot down your questions. I am seeing the questions come in as well, and I see there are a lot. So as they come to you, just keep sending them. And we are going to move on to SAN submissions with Cheryl.
Okay, so what I wanted to mainly address are the things that I see are common misunderstandings or issues, so that we can hopefully process the SANs, more quickly with the correct information. So one of the things I wanted to, we just wanted to indicate here is the definition of significant additional needs. Because sometimes, we get requests for funding for things that don't really meet the definition. which is that the client would have a significant need for medically necessary services that exceed their algorithm amount as defined in the statute. So you need to be like really paying attention to what you're requesting and definitely verifying that, you know, funds cannot be moved around to accommodate that need, or, you know, natural and generic supports are not available to accommodate that need before you submit them for SANS funding. And then please remember when the AIM is needed, because we send a great deal of requests for additional information just for AIMs. So remember that anytime that a person's algorithm amount changes, you are supposed to go through that process again, where you request the new algorithm amount from the region, and you discuss that amount with the client and their support team, to determine if their needs can be met within that new algorithm amount, and if not, complete the AIM, the amount implementation meeting worksheet, to submit with the SAN. But anytime there's an algorithm change, you must submit the AIM with the SAN. And that just having that document will stop a lot of those REIs and delaying the SAN from being completed. Okay, next slide. So I wanted to just, you know, give you a link to where the SAN resources are on the website. You know, we try and keep these updated. So anytime I see that there's a common, you know, issue that we keep seeing over and over, we try and go in here and update these documents. So, you know, please make sure that you're looking at the SAN training guide for support coordinators. And we also have 4 new SAN videos for specific parts of the SAN that we know are issues that, you know, you can review before submitting your SAN if you're having difficulty. Okay.
Cheryl, did you want to open up the
job aid?
The job aid?
Yeah, let's open we can do that now.
Okay. So to get to the job aid, you're going to go to the support coordination website. If it'll open, there we go. And it's right here at the top. So the WSC job aid significant additional needs documentation. So that's what we're going to look at right now.
Okay, so please use this. Now, what we've done, for those of you that have done SANs, you know that the WSC SAN assessment page, that was built into that SAN assessment page for the service-specific documentation requirements. So Elizabeth, can you go down to the service-specific section?
Yes.
So please make sure that you are using this when you submit your SAN, because it tells you, you know, the documentation that we need to have in order to complete the SAN. You know, there's no point in us, you know, receiving the SAN, having to do another RAI and wait another, you know, 30 days or whatever, 10 days or 15 days to see if we get the information to complete the SAN, when we are, you know, have the list that, you know, of the information that is required or that we need to do the determination. So when you do your WSC SAN assessment and you see and you click the services that you are asking for, you know, you get the drop down with the documentation requirements, and you're supposed to indicate where in the record those documents can be found. You know, quite often I'll see that a box is checked, but the documentation just isn't there, and then we have to request it again. So we're trying to make it as efficient as possible so that we don't have to keep going back and forth requesting new documentation. So some of the common ones are like the behavior assistant one that you see right now in front of you. It's the support coordinator's responsibility to get those base forms when you submit the request for behavior assistance services. And as you know, the handbook only allows behavior assistance services to be approved 6 months at a time, because it is supposed to be a time limited service. So, you know, don't ask for a year's worth of behavior assistance services that then requires due process, which upsets the client and their family members. and just causes, more difficulty because you're asking for a year's worth of services when the handbook only allows us to approve it 6 months at a time. But be sure to start that process. Every region has their process for requesting information from the region behavior analyst. And if you don't know what it is, then get with your regional liaison. But please include that documentation when you do those requests. The ones that we seem to have an issue with, if you could go down to personal support. So for personal support, if it's a continuing service, then we need to have the documentation that describes the duties that the provider is doing and the time span that it requires. And we have to have a copy of those service logs. So, don't just send us a screenshot of a schedule and you have X mark from 9 o'clock in the morning to 5 o'clock at night with no information about what the provider's doing or what assistance the consumer needs with from the personal support provider. You have to be giving us enough information so that we can determine medical necessity. And then can you go down to private duty nursing? And then so for private duty nursing, residential nursing, the nursing services, please pay attention to this list because we have to have this documentation for nursing services, especially the list of duties to be performed by a nurse, the documentation that active nursing intervention is needed on a continuous basis for over 2 consecutive hours, and the nurse's notes at a minimum are critical and for us to be able to make a determination of medical necessity for the nursing services. So, it's right there on the SAN when you create the SAN in the WSC SAN assessment page. Please pay attention to it and get the documentation attached when you submit the SAN. It'll make things easier for everybody. Okay, you can go back to the the next one. Okay, so incomplete SANs. So if a SAN is submitted and it's incomplete, then these are the common reasons for SANs to be returned to the support coordinator, and we'll look at these individually as well. But if there's no submit date, we cannot complete the SAN. If SAN services are incomplete, and I'll show you what that means, that it will be returned. If no documentation is provided, it will be returned. And if the WSC SAN assessment was not created, it will be returned. Go ahead, yeah. So this is where the dates are. If this is all grayed out, so you won't be able to actually submit it to state office or for state review if no submit date is there. So support coordinators are just picking some other status like corrections made and trying to send it, but we can't accept it that way. The submission date indicates that the SAN has completed validation and is ready to be submitted. So if you submit one like this, it'll be returned. Okay, next. So this is what I mean by SAN service is incomplete. So the SAN service status and the recommendation boxes in the WSC reviewer type need to be completed. That indicates that you've gone into each service, you've addressed what needs to be addressed with that service, and you've put it in pending status. And if these are blank, like it shows here, it will be returned to you. Okay, next. If there's no documentation, so I know some people are putting the documentation sometimes in the demographic notes section. We will look there, and if we see it there, then we'll go ahead and accept it. That's not where it's supposed to be. It should be in the SAN record, but it will not be returned if I see the documentation in the demographic notes section. But this is where it should be. If I don't see the documentation in either section, it will come back to you. Okay, next. And then the WSC SAN assessment. If there's no assessment here, it will be returned to you. Okay. Okay, so there is one of the videos that we have on the website gives you a very good explanation of when to exclude services when you submit the SAN. And what this is for is because we really only need, if it's the same service, if you have multiple lines on the cost plan, but it's the same service with the same rate and the same ratio, we don't need every single one of those lines to come over to SAN services. It just makes things a lot harder to do because we're having to, count the units and figure out, the units that should be prorated and the units that, you need to continue. And it gets really complicated and difficult for us to calculate. So if you can go on to the next one, then maybe we'll come back to this one. So here's one example, and this is the same thing that's in that SAN video. So if you have if your client has 2 service plans for companion services for life skills development level 1, and one runs the whole fiscal year from 7/1 to 6/30, and one only ran for 2 months, because you can have 2 different providers for that service, and they were both for 2,400 units. When you do your SAN services, since the provider doesn't matter for SAN purposes, it's the units that we're worried about, then you would put the full 4,800 units in that current fiscal year units field. And then if that's what you need on the annualized basis, you would indicate that in the annualized basis as well. You don't need to bring over both the screens for provider John and provider Shirley. One of those can be excluded. You will just add the units and put them all onto one screen. And like I said, it doesn't matter, who the provider is. We're not looking at the provider as long as it's the same service with the same rate. So they're both agency, they're both solo, and the same ratio. And then can you go to the next one? And then if it's different providers with non-overlapping dates, and so the other one had some overlapping dates, this one has non-overlapping dates. The ADT service for the first provider ended in October, and then a different provider started in January to the end of the fiscal year. Same thing, we only need one service plan, doesn't matter who the provider is, and the units need to be combined. So this would indicate that, you add those 2 together, and 1,080 units are needed for the current fiscal year. And then maybe next year the person wants to go full-time for the 1,440, you would put that 1,440 in your annualized units field. So can you go back to the when to exclude slide? Okay, so a couple other things. If a service has been canceled, so if there's $0 spent, the service wasn't used at all, the service was canceled, you can exclude that service from coming over to SAN services. You do not need to bring that over. So same provider, same service, non-overlapping dates is similar to what we just talked about. You would just, combine the units onto the, one SAN service. Same provider, non-overlapping dates, same ratios, same thing. Now, if it's different ratios, so if it's the same service, they're not overlapping dates, but it's different ratios, then you do need to bring both of those services over to SAN services because they're different ratios and different rates. So it's really all about getting the funding correct so the person has the funding they need to meet their service needs for the fiscal year. And then the last one, if it's the same provider, same service with overlapping dates, that should never happen because your plan would not validate if you had that in your plan. So if you can exclude one because they're the same, then exclude it. That brings over, it's a lot less services that we have to look at and calculate and figure out. And the risk of those calculation mistakes is a lot less. Okay, go ahead now. Okay, so if we send one back for corrections, then the note that's in the SAN notes indicates that, when you make your corrections, change the status back to corrections made. So I check that every day. I check the queue for SANs that have a status of corrections made. And when I see that the corrections have been made and it's correct, then I will change the status to pending and indicate the date that I received it back in when the date returned field. Please, once it's pending, do not change it back to corrections made. So that's it's in the note that I send to you, but I continue to see that people keep going back in and changing it back to corrections made after I've changed it to pending. That's my way of knowing that that SAN is ready, to be put in the stack for assignments. So once it's submitted and it changes to pending, leave it alone. And then don't change it to corrections made for other reasons, like when the submit date doesn't show up. So a lot of you have submitted help desk tickets because of this message that shows at the top of a SAN once a SAN is completed. I have submitted a ticket to try and eliminate that sentence that says that you can update the current budget amount by clicking on the ellipsis. That's really not intended for the support coordinator. So that's kind of like our cue. So let's say that there was an error and we went in and did a revision, or something was submitted after the SAN was completed and we did a reconsideration. That just tells us that we can go ahead and update that so that the new decision is calculated correctly. But that's not an instruction to the support coordinator to change the budget field. We actually initially, when the SAN was designed, that field was open, and what happened was support coordinators were going in and changing the budget, and then the data that we were trying to collect to send for legislative reports and stuff was messed up, because that wasn't really the intent of what that field is there for. So we locked it down, and that's why you can't change it. But you don't need to change it because the budget is changed on the consumer's budget tab. Okay, next. Okay, do you want to do the conclusion, or do you want me to?
I can do the conclusion.
Okay.
Okay, so we gave you guys a lot of information, and I understand that there are a lot of questions, and Cheryl and I will do our best to go through them. But what we are hoping that you take away from this training when it comes to plans and SANs is that you all have the resources available to you. So when you're working on your plans, you want to be in communication with your regional staff. If you have questions or concerns about completing different service screens, if you have situations or scenarios that are a little bit different than the normal changes to a plan, you should be reaching out to them, speaking with them, letting them know what's going on, and then using those resources that we have up on the website, so that once you're in iConnect, once you're doing the data entry part of the change, you can do it correctly and feel confident that you are doing it correctly. With SAN submissions, it's a lot of the same ideas. So the materials that Cheryl creates and that she puts up on the website, she makes them for you so that you will have them when you're putting your SAN in. If there's ever a time where you're going through the process and you are unsure of what to do, you should reach out to your regional liaison and ask for that support. There's no reason to not use your regional staff as your first line of contact for support and help, because if you're putting things into iConnect incorrectly, unfortunately, it will get sent back or it will get held up, and it just makes things take a lot longer than it should. Cheryl, do you have any final comments?
No, just that, like you said, we will work on answering all your questions and getting them back out to everybody.
Yes, I was going through the ones that were coming in. I think what we're going to do is compile them and make some kind of FAQ and try to address the overarching themes that people are sending in. If we find a question that is very unique or something that's just a little different than the norm, we'll reach out to you directly or to your region and have them talk you through whatever your situation is.